Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TCEQ's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Renewal webinar. My name is Mira Hodges, and I will be your moderator today. Accurate attendance information and survey results help us justify future webinars and other events. So if you want to see more from us, please complete the attendance form linked in the live event Q&A on the right side of your screen. If you do not see the Q&A, turn it on by clicking the question mark icon on the top right of the screen. We will now pause for a few minutes to allow you to complete the attendance form. Attendees will not be able to speak during today's webinar, but you can use the Q&A to ask a question at any time. We will do our best to answer your questions during our 2 Q&A sessions. If we run out of time before we answer your question, or if you have a site-specific question, please email us at swgp@tceq.texas.gov or call us at 512-239-4671, and we will communicate with you individually. There will be 5 presentations today. After the second presentation, we will have a short Q&A session, then a 15-minute break. Unfortunately, at this time, we do not have links to the presentations for you to follow along with, but they will be posted to our website soon for you to review afterwards. Lastly, each presenter would like to introduce themselves, so please give them your full attention.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rebecca Villalba, and I am the team leader for the Stormwater team in the Water Quality Division at TCEQ.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Monica Alba Garcia, and I am a perma writer in the Stormwater team.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Kovos, and I'm also a permit writer on the Stormwater team.
Hello, I'm Casey Marone. I am as well a permit writer on the Stormwater team.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Gres Salamia, and I'm also a writer on the Stormwater.
Okay, can you all now see my screen and hear me?
Yes, we're all good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I will go ahead and start this for our technical training on the new MS4 Phase 2 general permit that was just issued. So we'll first give you a little overview in case you're new to the MS4 Phase 2 program. You might be needing a refresher, or you're a consultant that are starting to work with clients, or you're newly regulated MS4. This will get you up to speed a little bit on what the Phase 2 MS4 program is all about. So first of all, the Phase 2 MS4 program is part of the core programs of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program that we received authorization from EPA on September 14 of 1998. So the Clean Water Act started it all. Then they required EPA to develop a program and rules regarding stormwater. So EPA created rules in the Code of Federal Regulations. Then they created the NPDES permitting program. And as I said, on September of 1998, they gave us authorization at TCEQ for Texas. So we now call it the Texas Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. As part of that, we have the MS4 Stormwater Program. Then we further give you MS4's authority to implement your program within your local MS4 area. So why is stormwater of concern? Stormwater sewers do not treat or filter water. So that's the first issue. And you don't want to actually treat it or filter it because that costs money. That's not necessarily something you want to do. Stormwater collects pollutants and debris and deposits them into water bodies. As the rain falls, it grabs whatever it finds and it moves it down to the water bodies. Sediment affects aquatic ecosystems. Some pollutants bioaccumulate. And then we have water quality issues such as impairments in the water bodies. It degrades aquatic life habitat and it causes flooding. So this is why regulating stormwater is important and is of a concern to everybody. As MS4 areas, cities grow and develop, you have less area for water to fall. You have less ground to absorb that, less trees. in some cases, so the impervious area keeps increasing. As you have more impervious area, you have more runoff, more debris, more development, you have more pollutant issues, more debris, more sources that affect the quality of stormwater. So that's why we need to protect stormwater quality. So potential pollutants from entities in the public include floatables, trash, oil, hazardous metals, sediment, bacteria, and organic matter. So this picture shows you those things that unfortunately we see in our storm drains and our waterways. So specifically, the stormwater program that we are dealing with right now is the MS4, which stands for the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4. And MS4 is a publicly owned or operated stormwater drainage system that is designed to collect or convey stormwater. It includes drains, ditches, curbs, gutters, municipal streets, and roads with drainage systems. The federal regulations are in Title 40 Code of Federal Regulations 122.26B8 is where you specifically find the regulations regarding this program. Other terms that you might hear refer to are MS4 operator or within the MS4. And within the MS4 is the specific area that is located within an urban area of 50,000 people or more. And we'll go over that in a little bit more. So we have two phases in the MS4 program. We have the phase 1, which we're not going to be talking about here. We're going to be focusing on the phase 2 program. So the phase 2 program came into play in 2000. So in order to be regulated under the 2024 phase 2 MS4 general permit, or the TXR 040,000, an MS4 must be publicly owned or operated, designed or used for collecting or conveying stormwater, cannot be a combined sewer, is not supposed to be a part of a publicly owned treatment works. And in order to be a phase 2, it needs to be fully or partially located within an urban area with a population of at least 50,000 people or more, as determined in the 2000, 2010, or the 2020 decennial censuses conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau. So here on the right, you see a table, and in that table is the list of the 2020 urban areas in Texas. So these are the only urban areas that we have in Texas, and you'll see the population. So I'll explain how to read this in a little bit. So this is an important table for you to know, and is accessed through our website as well. So the Census Bureau and the phase 2 stormwater regulations. So the phase 2 MS4 program is going to regulate those areas or that portion that falls within the boundary of an urban area with at least 50,000 people or more. So if you're in MS4 within an urban area within at least 50,000 people or more, then you are required to obtain coverage under this phase 2 MS4 general permit. In special cases, we, TCQ, as a delegating permitting authority, we can declare or designate, there's a special designation in the rules, that an MS4 operator that's located outside an urban area with at least 50,000 people or more, we can designate that MS4 to be required to obtain coverage because they're causing water quality issues or other concerns that we have, and therefore we will ask them to be designated to be regulated under the phase 2 MS4 program. As of now, Texas has not designated anybody specifically. Everybody is automatically brought in as a result of the 2000, 2010, or the 2020 U.S. Census designations. So this is a very quick example of the decennial census, an example for you to know how to read the information that you find in the U.S. Census Tiger web pages and also the listing of the urban areas. So as you can see on the right, we have an example of an area that is in the San Antonio area. You have San Antonio, you have Bernie, you have New Braunfels, you have Floresville down here, San Marcos. So here we're focusing on the left side hand on the table. You have the name of the various urban areas. On the right-hand side of that table, you have the urban area population. So as you can see, San Antonio is not of concern for us here because San Antonio was designated as a phase 1 in 1990. So we're not thinking about them. But the rest of these 4 urban areas came into play as a result of either the 2000, 2010, or 2020 US Census. So these are actually New Braunfels, Bernie, San Marcos, and Floresville. They're actually urban areas. However, you need to look at their population because if you can see the definition below, in order to be designated as an MS4 phase 2, you need to be within an urban area with a population of 50,000 people or more. It is not referring to the MS4 population. It is referring to the urban area population. So for example, New Braunfels has 100,000 people. So therefore, they are already an urban area that has that population. So anybody that's within the New Braunfels urban area is automatically an MS4 under this phase 2 program. Bernie only has 18,000, so therefore they're not of concern and they're not regulated under this general permit at this time, but San Marcos is and Floresville is not. Something else that you need to understand to determine what portion of your MS4 might be or not regulated. So if you look at this picture, the orange area that we have is the 2010 urbanized area. That's what it was called back then, but that term is not used anymore. And Monica later on will talk to you about it. But for this purpose, just know that the orange area is from the 2010 urbanized area. Then this blue area is the area that came in as a result of the 2020 urban area with a population of at least 50,000. The red circles indicate potential MS4s. So an MS4 was here in this orange area in 2010. Even though they're not showing up in this blue area in 2020, they're still going to be considered a phase 2 MS4. For the phase 2 MS4 program, once regulated, always regulated. You never fall off. You will always be regulated somehow. In this case, this orange area, you are both in the 2010 urbanized area results as well as in the 2020 urban area with a population of at least 50,000. So that whole area is still regulated and will continue to be regulated under this 2020 census. Then this area now over here is special attention to this one, please. Part of it is in this blue area that came as a result of the 2020 census. So that new area now is going to be a newly regulated MS4. But the portions that are outside of that blue area do not necessarily need to be regulated within the MS4's program. If the MS4 decides to do it, then great, that's better for the environment, but you're not required to do that. So the information that I will talk to you about later really applies to whatever you decide is going to be the permitted area for you, either the whole circle there that encompasses everything outside the blue area, as well as what's inside the blue area, or only what's in the blue area. Whatever you determine from the beginning will be what you need to regulate within your program. So within the phase 2 MS4 program, there are different types of MS4s. So you need to understand that in order to read the permit and determine what applies to you. A traditional MS4 is what we call a city or a town. So this is traditional. A non-traditional MS4 is a county, a special district such as municipal utility districts, flood control districts, or other special districts. States or federal agencies, prisons, military bases, public universities. All of those are examples of non-traditional MS4s. Our general permit, since the last permit cycle, actually 2 permit cycles ago, we have been implementing a tier permitting approach. So we have our permit divided into 4 levels. Level 1 is for an MS4 that has an area of a population of up to 10,000 people. And this is for that area, again, that is regulated within the MS4 area that is within the urban area with a population of at least 50,000 or more. A level 2 is divided into level 2A and level 2B when you read the requirements. Level 2A includes the traditional MS4s, those that are cities that have a population between 10,000 to 40,000. A level 2B includes the non-traditionals regardless of the population. And then level 2 also have additional requirements in MCM3 for both levels. A level 3 is any MS4 that has a population between 40,000 to 100,000. And here I'm talking about the population for all these tiers or these levels, the population from the 2020 census. It has nothing to do with the population of the urban area, it's the actual MS4 population. Level 3s have additional requirements under MCMs 3, 4, and 6. And then level 4s are our biggest small MS4s that have a population of 100,000 or more. So they also have additional requirements, and they're required to implement one more MCM, which is number 7. So the other requirement, now that you know if you are regulated under the general permit, now you need to understand what are the requirements to be regulated. What do I need to do as a small MS4? Well, one of the first things that you need to do is to develop and implement a Stormwater Management Program, or SWMP. That is the core requirement of this general permit. In the Stormwater Management Program, you need to include 7 minimum control measures, and there's an optional 8th MCM if you want to implement that. You need to have a schedule for implementation expressed as months and years over the 5-year permit cycle of the general permit. You need to implement everything by the end of the 5-year term. Then if you are discharged into an impaired water body, then you need additional requirements that you must comply with. And then you also need to submit an annual report each year that is due by March 31st. So those are the basic requirements of the general permit. A question that we get from MS4s is legal authority. So as I mentioned, we have traditional MS4s. A traditional MS4 is required to develop an ordinance or other regulatory mechanism to implement their stormwater management program and enforce it within their jurisdiction. So that seems to be simpler and clearer to understand because the authority is already there. The ones where it's a little bit more complicated is for those non-traditionals because they don't really have enforcement authority within their jurisdiction. So here we've listed some types of regulatory mechanisms that a non-traditional MS4 can implement. There can be service agreements, they can be rules and regulations, they can be local agreements or other contracts that can be implemented with adjoining jurisdictions or counties to help enforce and implement the MS4 program within that non-traditional MS4 jurisdiction. Even MS4 is discharged into an impaired water body, then there's more requirements because that means the water body has concerns, it's sick, we need to help it, we need to protect it, we need to prevent, minimize, remove the impairment if possible. So you need to address additional requirements in your stormwater management program and then in the annual report. Impairment means that the water body has been identified as not meeting the Texas surface water quality standards on the latest TCEQ and EPA approved report that we call the Texas Integrated Report Index of Water Quality Impairment. This report lists both the impaired water bodies with a TMDL as well as those without a TMDL, and that stands for total maximum daily load. The MS4s must annually evaluate the status of the receiving water bodies that they're discharging to. Is it impaired now and it wasn't before? Does it have a TMDL now and it didn't before? And you need to include those findings in the annual report and follow what the permit requires. So this report has category 5, which are those that are impaired but do not have a TMDL. Category 4 are those that have a TMDL. So that's the difference of those two categories that you'll see. And what's important is that you understand that this report needs to be looked at for the latest one that was approved by both TCEQ and EPA. If you're discharging directly to an impaired water body without a TMDL, then there's certain requirements in the permit that you need to include. You need to determine if your MS4 is a source of the pollutant of concern for that impairment that the water body has. You need to describe in your SWMP-focused best management practices. You need to also include measurable goals for each best management practice. If the pollutant of concern is bacteria, then you need to identify potential sources and implement best management practices to address those sources. And you report your progress in the annual report. So this picture is designed to help you understand if you're an MS4 and you're discharging indirectly to a water body that has an impaired water body, that is an impaired water body for a pollutant of concern. But if you discharge it indirectly, then you do not need to worry about addressing the requirements. But if you're discharging directly to a water body that has an impairment, then you do need to address those items in your Stormwater Management Program and annual report. As opposed to the other one, this slide now talks about the discharges to an impaired water body where you do have a total maximum daily load. The water body is more sick than the other one because now we've had to go to the route of having to develop a total maximum daily load. So when you are discharging to a water body that has a TMDL, then you need to determine again, is your MS4 the source of the pollutant of concern? You need to identify the benchmark. And in order to do that, that equates to the total maximum daily loads or TMDL's waste load allocation. So there is a document on the website that explains the TMDL, how it was developed, and it includes the waste load allocation. That's going to become your benchmark. And it is an aggregate waste load allocation. Then you need to implement targeted controls, BMPs with measurable goals. If the pollutant of concern is bacteria, then you refer to the TMDL implementation plan or I-plan, or use alternative BMPs if what's in the I-plan has already been completed, or if you prefer to do something else that's equivalent or better. You always need to be assessing progress towards the benchmark, and if no progress, then you need to select alternative BMPs. So this diagram or this picture shows you when you need to be addressing these permit requirements if you're discharging to a watershed with a TMDL. Okay, so I talked to you about a SWMP. What is a SWMP? Specifically, a SWMP is a comprehensive program that's created to manage the quality of discharges from your small MS4 and for you to meet the requirements of the Phase 2 MS4 general permit. The SWMP needs to include the 7 minimum control measures as applicable and explain how the MS4 plans to achieve the control measures to the maximum extent practicable, or MEP, by identifying and implementing the best management practices, or BMPs, for each MCM. Again, the 7th MCM is only required for level 4s, and the 8th MCM is optional for any small MS4 to take. But once it's taken, it becomes required. Under the 2024 general permit, the Stormwater Management Program is required to be drafted and implemented. If you already had one, you need to update it. However, you're not required to submit to the TCQ that Stormwater Management Program with the NOI. The previous permit terms required you to submit that. With this one, you don't, but you're still required to develop and implement it prior to submitting your NOI. So the Stormwater Management Program that you develop for your MS4 becomes what we call your MS4 permit. That is what you're going to be implementing. Everybody within your organization and whoever else you're sharing responsibilities needs to know, needs to understand it, needs to have a copy of it. So the MS4 then is required to reduce the discharge of pollutants from its MS4 to the MEP, which is the maximum extent practicable that I just mentioned, and also to meet the water quality requirements of the Clean Water Act. Remember, that's what started it all. The MEP standard is something that a lot of people do not understand. It is an iterative process, meaning you need to continually adapt to current conditions, and the best management practice or BMP effectiveness needs to be reviewed and adjusted while striving to attain water quality. So you cannot be doing the same thing that you've been doing for 20 years. Every permit cycle, you are required to look at what worked, what didn't work, implement things that work, so that you're not wasting money on something that's not achieving environmental success. Our general permit also allows for stormwater management program responsibilities to be combined, to be shared, and we call those a coalition. So a coalition is when you have multiple MS4s that share efforts in meeting one or all of the SWMP requirements. If that's the case, then the SWMP needs to clearly indicate who is doing what and include the name and MS4 authorization numbers for each coalition member. So water minimum control measures. Each minimum control measure, or MCM, has best management practices that each have their own measurable goal to specify the clear, specific, and measurable activities, goals, and deadlines that must be implemented by the small MS4s in their SWMP based on the level that we have in the permit, level 1, 2, 3, or 4. The general permit has the requirements in sections D1 through 8 for each MCM. Just in the quick picture format, you can see that the SWMP gets information and gets to be developed by including all these different minimum control measures. Again, level 4 only has to do the industrial stormwater sources, and then MCM 8 is optional. So all of these play into making up the stormwater management program for an MS4. I will go fairly quickly over the MCMs. We have a slide for each one, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because we don't have that time, but I do want you to have the slides and be able to refer to them. So for MCM 1, it's public education and outreach. Please note that we've changed this, and Monica will explain a little bit more. So from a previous permit to the current permit now, MCM 1 is called public education and outreach. So for this, you're required to implement a minimum number of public education and outreach BMPs. And based on your level, it depends how many BMPs you have to do. So for example, if you're level 1, you have to implement 3 BMPs that we have prescribed or included in the permit. If you're levels 2, then you need to do 4 BMPs. If you're levels 3 and 4, then you need to do 5 BMPs. So that's sort of how each MCM is split up. For this, examples of BMPs include educating the public, the employees for the MS4 or businesses, distributing educational materials, social media, posting, information on your website. So this is what MCM1 covers. It's educating the public, outreach. It includes your public employees as well. MCM2 now is called public involvement and participation. So what is required here, again, based on your levels, you have different BMP numbers that you have to implement and select from the general permit. Examples include public meetings, volunteering in water quality monitoring groups, or cleanup events. MCM3 is illicit discharge detection and elimination. This is a very important MCM because this allows you to identify issues that maybe you didn't know were occurring and preventing them from occurring in the future. So for this one, permittee shall develop, implement, and enforce a program to investigate, detect, and eliminate illicit discharges into your small MS4. So you must include a plan to detect and address the non-stormwater discharges, including illegal dumpings. You need to have an MS4 mapping, education and training, public reporting of illicit discharges and spills. You must do inspections. And then if you're level 3 and 4, you have additional requirements. MCM4 is construction site stormwater runoff control. For this one, the MS4 needs to develop, implement, and enforce a program requiring operators of small and large construction activities to select, install, implement, and maintain stormwater control measures that prevent illicit discharges to the MEP. Construction plan review, site inspections, and enforcement. So there's required BMPs for all of the MS4s, and then there's additional requirements for levels 3 and 4. The next MCM is MCM5, post-construction stormwater management in new development and redevelopment areas. So this one is a program to be created to the extent allowable under the law. You know, we talked about legal authority. So depending whether you're a traditional or non-traditional MS4, you will need to then control stormwater discharges from new and redeveloped sites within your MS4. So again, you know, level 4s have additional requirements. If you're a non-traditional MS4, you need to develop and implement an ordinance. So you need to update it as needed. For non-traditional MS4, you need to develop and implement an additional type of regulatory mechanism. MCM6 is for pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. So these are for those activities and operations that you as an MS4 are doing. You are required to also do the right thing. You can't just be talking and preaching. You have to do the walk and also do what the general permit requires you to do. So you need to have a program for operation and maintenance to include employee training. You need to train your employees for those permittee-owned facilities, control inventory. You need disposal of waste material, contractor requirements and oversight, structural control maintenance. So again, this is something that you as the MS4, you have activities that impact the water quality for stormwater, so therefore you need to address it as well. MCM7, as I said again, is really only for level 4s unless you want to implement it. You know, feel free to do that if you're not a level 4. But level 4s must identify and control pollutants that are being discharged in stormwater from industrial sites. So this includes landfills, municipal hazardous waste facilities, and other industrial commercial discharges that the permittee determines are contributing a substantial pollutant loading to your MS4. You need to develop and implement SOPs for inspections of those industrial sites. MCM8 is optional, and so this one is only for those that want to obtain it. And so this is authorization for construction activities where the MS4 is a site operator. So instead of you submitting a notice of intent to TCQ to obtain authorization under the construction general permit, you don't need to do that. You can do that and manage it yourself if you select this MCM. But once you select it, you must implement it until you decide you don't want to, then you need to submit a notice of change to remove it. But if you do select it, then you need to implement everything pretty much that the construction general permit says, except you don't need to submit a notice of intent to us. So we talked about what is a SWMP, what are minimum control measures. Now we go a little bit over what are best management practices. So best management practices include schedules of activities, prohibitions of practices, maintenance procedures, structural controls, local ordinances, and other management practices. So BMPs don't necessarily need to be a management thing. It can be a structural. So BMPs can be structural or non-structural controls. BMPs can include treatment requirements, operating procedures, and practices to help control runoffs, spills, or leaks, waste disposal, or drainage from raw material storage areas, for example. Different BMPs are required to be implemented within each of the minimum control measures that we have in our general permit. So each of the BMPs or activities, as you also see them called in the general permit, include what we call measurable goals. So what is a measurable goal? A measurable goal needs to be clear, specific, and measurable. That's required by federal rule. And we need to indicate through the measurable goals how a permittee or an MS4 will be successful in implementing the various BMPs for each minimum control measure that you have outlined in your stormwater management program. The measurable goals need to include the activity or the BMP to be completed, the quantifiable target to measure progress, and a schedule or date of completion. So in this example, table 6 from our IDDE BMP on our general permit, the activity or BMP is to maintain a current and accurate MS4 map as described in that part of the permit. And the measurable goal is that you need to review and update as necessary, but at least one time annually to include features which have been added, removed, or changed within your MS4 area. So this is what best management practices and measurable goals look like in the permit. This will help ensure that your own measurable goals are clear, specific, and measurable with a schedule or date of completion. Again, this is to meet the requirements of the comprehensive general permit that we have now and also the federal MS4 rule. So measurable goals are supposed to be tracked and implemented over time. You need to be measuring the progress in implementing those BMPs or those activities. You're not just supposed to be implementing them without tracking them. In order to figure out if things are working, if you have improvement in the environment, you need to track and measure. So you need to track the number of BMPs implemented, the effectiveness. Did it reduce the pollutants to the maximum extent practicable? Did you see environmental improvement? If you didn't, then you need to revise things. You need to come up with something else that works. So overall, a successful stormwater management program ensures that your MS4 is going to comply with the general permit. But you need to make sure that when you develop it, that you obtain commitment and management leadership, ownership, understanding of what you have included in your stormwater management program. It cannot be something that only down at the people on the ground know how to do. You need to have the backing and support of everybody higher up. All the way to the top, your management needs to understand what you as an MS4 is going to be doing, what you're committed to do in your stormwater management, which is, again, your MS4 permit. You need to maintain good communication across departments. If something's not working, you need to discuss, communicate, and see what you need to do. You need to assign accountability and responsibility. Everything doesn't have to rely on the MS4 stormwater manager or stormwater inspector. You have different programs that you share responsibilities. You cannot take credit for what you're already doing. You just need to communicate. And of course, the SWMP needs to have continuous improvement. As I said, it is an iterative program. So this is just a quick way of showing you that you need to develop, first of all, your SWMP. It needs to be aimed at improvement. Then you implement it. And then you check to see if it's working by analyzing the results every year or every quarter, whatever you want to do. But definitely at a minimum, once a year, you need to determine, is it working? If not, you need to adjust your BMPs or other actions and submit a notice of change as applicable. Speaking of notice of change, speaking of annual reviews, you need to submit an annual report to us. So an annual report is the other requirement that small MS4s must conduct as a result of being regulated under the Phase 2 MS4 general permit. So an annual report is a concise report of progress where you're showing that you made progress towards implementing your SWMP, your minimum control measures, and you're required to update it and submit the annual report annually. So for the 2024 general permit, all MS4s will be required to submit an annual report following a calendar year. That is going to be January 1st to December 31st. All annual reports must be submitted electronically using the NET MS4 system, unless you obtain an electronic waiver from electronic reporting. Information required in each annual report includes information on the BMPs and the progress towards achieving the measurable goals to the MEP. Information on impaired water body monitoring and management, if applicable, because you might be discharging to an impaired water body with a TMDL or without a TMDL. And then other topics that are relevant to the SWMP and annual progress made for your MS4. Annual reports, as I said, are to be submitted to TCQ electronically within 90 days of the end of each calendar year. So that means March 31st. The annual reports must include the status of compliance with permit terms and conditions, the results of information collected and analyzed, including monitoring data if you have any, a summary of activities that the MS4 plans to undertake during the next reporting cycle if you have a notice of change, any changes made to the Stormwater Management Program during the reporting period. Again, anything that you do needs to be in conformance with the new comprehensive general permit. Annual reports must include quantify the activities conducted, report the accomplishments, and show progress. Note if the MS4 is relying on another entity to satisfy some of the permit requirements because you might be sharing responsibilities, or if you're in a coalition that's sharing the Stormwater Management Program, then each MS4 needs to submit an annual report, even though one entity might be the only one that prepares it. Each one of you needs to submit an annual report. These annual reports need to be signed and certified, both based on federal and state regulations, by the authorized signatory of your MS4. An authorized signatory is somebody that is city manager or mayor, somebody that's a public elected official. Or for annual reports, you can delegate that authorized signatory to somebody else that meets the requirements of the rules, but that delegation must be done by that authorized signatory. And just to end my presentation, I just want to give you a quick overview as I explain, we have the census that impacts our MS4, therefore impacts our phase 2 MS4 universe. So this is to show you from the very first permit that we issued in 2007, this was as a result of the 2000 US Census. We had about 400 notices of intent and a little bit more, I think about 100 of waivers. Then in 2010, we had a new census come in and it made our universe grow a little bit. So we grew a little bit, like 200. And of course, we didn't have a census when our general permit, the 2019, was issued, so our universe sort of stayed the same. But then now for the 2020 census, our 2024 general permit cycle is going to be affected. Right now, we have potentially identified this many, almost 600 entities that will be coming into the fold to be regulated as a phase 2 MS4. Those include about 70 cities, counties. We have, many special districts. We still need confirmation to see if they own and operate a stormwater conveyance system. Therefore, they might be not an MS4 or they would be an MS4. So we're still trying to get those numbers, but this is at least the most we will grow by. I'm hoping the numbers are less, but that is at least the maximum that our universe has grown to. So the slide will have resources for you to identify if you are an MS4 regulated, how your area, if you're an existing MS4, how your area changed, and also where you can find our general permit and some rules. The rest of my team right now includes Monica Alba Garcia, Hannah Cobos, Benjamin Dixon, Jesse Grace Alamilla, Casey Maron, and Leland Moore. Those are the permit writers, so the technical specialists. Monica, Hannah, Jesse, and Casey will be giving presentations right after me. And then I have Mary Huseman, Janine Tolliver, and Carolee Truxas, who are part of our Stormwater Processing Center. So you can call them when you have questions about the MSGP or the Construction General Permit, NOIs, e-permits. But you call the rest of the team when you have technical questions. So thank you for your time.
So I'm going to go over the changes in the 2024 MS4 General Permit Renewal. So this is a presentation outline. We're going to discuss the significant changes in the 2024 renewal of the TXR 040,000 and the mostly highlighting the importance of reading the comprehensive general permit and how it'll apply to your specific MS4. Phase 2 MS4 General Permit, also known as a small MS4 General Permit, was effective on August 15th, 2024, and will expire in 5 years on August 15th, 2029. It authorizes stormwater and certain non-stormwater discharges from small MS4s to surface water in the state. All authorizations approved under the 2019 through 2024 general permit term received administrative continuance until the issuance of the 2024 general permit. And we're currently in the 180-day renewal period that ends on February 11th, 2025. Now we're going to talk about the significant changes for the 2024 renewal of the small MS4 general permit. So how are our permit renewal changes determined? So we do have a draft permit that we take from the previous permit cycle, and from there we take into consideration the stakeholder input, any input from the TCQ program area, what questions are customers coming to them with, things like that. And then we do receive management input, and then we look at the EPA approved MS4 general permits from previous cycles, and we also take into account any new and updated rules that the state of Texas is required to implement into our permit. Permit changes based on public comments. So the TCQ received over 100 individual comments from 19 comment submissions. These comments addressed a plethora of concerns about the comprehensive general permit option, specific measurable goals, the net MS4, certain MCMs, and target audiences. And other comments included editorial suggestions, clarifications, and grammatical errors. TCQ revised the permit documents in response to these comments that we received, and we compile these comments in the permit package, and they're reflective within the permit and the fact sheet. I'm now going to talk about the terminology in the 2000 and 2010 U.S. Decennial Census. So the Census Bureau's general definition of an urban area is based on population and population density. The Census Bureau delineated these densely populated urban areas into two categories: urbanized areas, UAs of 50,000 or more people; the urban clusters, UCs of at least 2,500 and less than 50,000 people. And on here we have the urbanized area reference map for Brownsville, Texas. So we did have terminology changes once the 2020 decennial census came about. So as of March 24th, 2022, the Census Bureau did stop distinguishing urbanized areas and urban clusters and now only identifies urban areas. In response, the EPA did publish a final rule on June 12, 2023 that replaced the term urbanized area in the federal Phase 2 MS4 regulations with urban areas with a population of at least 50,000 or more. This new change requires permitting authorities to use the 2020 census and future census data consistent with existing longstanding regulatory practice. The Census Bureau will no longer publish PDF maps of each area like they have in the past. Instead, they have published the following resources. We have the shapefiles of the urban areas and the interactive web map with the 2020 urban areas. The TCQ also used these new resources to determine the new MS4 universe. The federal 2017 MS4 general permit remand rule gives states the option to administer their Phase 2 MS4 program. We do have two options available to us. Option 1 is the comprehensive general permit approach. The general permit includes all clear, specific, and measurable requirements necessary to meet the MS4 standard to reduce pollutants to the maximum extent practicable, MEP, and no additional requirements are established after permit issuance. Option 2, the two-step general permit, also known as the procedural approach. We have a first step, which the general permit will include the clear, specific, and measurable requirements for some program areas for all MS4s. The second step, the state establishes additional requirements and BMPs for individual MS4s that are included in the stormwater pollution stormwater management programs. The previous Texas Phase 2 MS4 general permit went by the two-step permitting approach. Step 1, TCQ issued the statewide base general permit, and we did this for our past 3 permit cycles. For Step 2, MS4s wrote their own SWMP with enforceable permit requirements. And this Step 2 has, of course, sub-steps. So the TCQ and EPA reviewed each of the MS4's NOI application and their Stormwater Management Program. The MS4s published notice of their application and Stormwater Management Program in the newspaper, and allowing a 30-day public comment period and opportunity for public meeting. The TCQ then responded to any public comments received and held public meetings as applicable. The TCQ approved the application and Stormwater Management Program to authorize the MS4 under the general permit, and the MS4s implemented the public notice process for any notice of changes that are not considered minor modifications. One of the changes of the 2024 MS4 general permit renewal is moving from that two-step to a comprehensive permit type. So the permit was revised to meet comprehensive general permit standard under the federal 2017 MS4 general permit remand rule. The master general permit includes all of the clear, specific, and measurable requirements for MS4s to implement in their SWMP. We have the list of target audiences and pollutants or sources. We have a table of activities and BMPs that are associated with the measurable goals for each MCM that specify the frequency and minimum to select from. And we have requirements and level of effort increase with each MS4 level. We did remove the public notice requirements for NOIs and NOCs. This is due to the fact that during the Master General Permit public notice process, the TCQ provided a public notice of the defined terms and conditions that will determine compliance for each of the MS4s. Moving to the comprehensive permit type approach, also removed the requirement to submit a stormwater management program like we have in the past, along with the NOI application. We also removed the TCQ and EPA technical review requirements of the application and the SWMP. We now only require administrative reviews of the applications where the MS4s identify in the NOI which activities and BMPs listed in the permit they plan to implement based on their level. We created a streamlined annual reporting process based on the NOI application submittal. The annual report will pull the MS4 selected activities and BMPs from the submitted NOI application, streamlining the process. The Phase 2 general permit application review process, before with the two-step approach, this is what we were looking at. Now we're streamlining the process down to 3 steps. Now with the comprehensive permit. We have the administrative review of application, revised deficiencies as necessary, and lastly, the TCQ issues the authorization. Federal Electronic Reporting Rule. Per the NIPD's Federal Electronic Reporting Rule, electronic applications and reporting, such as the annual reports, are required for general permits by December 2025. TCQ, in order to implement this rule, we have shifted over to using the EPA's electronic application and reporting system known as the NET MS4, and we'll be using this for the 2024 general permit renewal. It's been in production since August 2024. And through NET MS4, you can access NOI waiver applications and annual reports. We are no longer accepting paper applications or the reports because of this rule. And since we've shifted over to using the EPA system, there have been some changes to the general permit that are necessary to fit into EPA's system. And these are part of the changes for the 2024 MS4 general permit renewal. So we have the revisions for electronic applications and reports. So we did split the previous MCM1, which included both the public education outreach involvement, over to MCM1 and MCM2, public education and outreach, and then public involvement / participation. This causes the remaining MCMs to be renumbered for a total of 8 MCMs, and again, this was necessary for consistency across nation and implementation into EPA's electronic application and reporting net MS4 system. Another revision for the electronic applications and reports was to reduce the annual report year options to have only one schedule for all MS4s. Now we're going with a calendar year, January to December. This is to fit into EPA's net MS4 system. The previous term allowed for the MS4 to select one of 3 options. We have the permit year, calendar year, and the fiscal year. And thankfully, most of our universe does use calendar year. So we're hoping that this transition is easier. And we did add language to explain how the MS4s that don't follow the calendar year will address the change during the first reporting year. Other modifications and clarifications. So we did clarify what a shared MS4 program is and what exactly are coalitions. We clarified required actions when TCQ lowers a total maximum daily waste load allocation during the permit term. And affected MS4 operators must update their SWMP and submit a notice of change if this does happen to be the case for your particular MS4. Optional MCM for municipal construction activities. We did add requirement to optional MCM-A for operators to conduct an observation and evaluation of dewatering controls on days where dewatering discharges occur. This is to be consistent with the TIPD's construction general permit that was issued back in March of 2023. We submitted the submission of the delegation of signatory forms are now required to be submitted electronically, and you can do so through our State of Texas Environmental Electronic Reporting System, also known as STEERS. And these are required for compliance with the federal NIPD's electronic reporting rule. Again, just touching base on the urbanized areas and the 2020 decennial census. So we are no longer identifying urbanized areas. As of July, the EPA has revised to remove references to urbanized areas and instead to include urban area with a population of 50,000 or more people phrasing. And we revised our permit language in the same way to refer to 2020 urban areas with a population of 50,000 or more people. And for further information, we do recommend seeing the NIPD's small MS4 urbanized area clarification rule. Other modifications and clarifications. So we clarified that the MS4 levels are determined based on the 2020 decennial census population data. So the level of an MS4 is based on the population in the most recent decennial census at the time of permit issuance. A national census held during a permit term will not affect the level of an MS4 until the next permit renewal. And then for the purposes of this section, survey population means the residential population within the regulated portion of the small MS4 based on the population data for the 2020 decennial census, except for non-traditional small MS4s listed in level 2B below. We modified MS4 level 2 to separate non-traditional MS4s from traditional MS4s. So level 2A, operators of traditional MS4s that serve a population of 10,000 to less than 40,000. And level 2B operators or to the all non-traditional MS4s. We modified the definition of waters of the U.S. to reference definition in the federal rules. We also clarified that MS4s which failed to apply for permit coverage in a previous permit term are not eligible for the 180-day renewal application grace period, and they are to submit an NOI immediately. We added permit language to list the federal rule criteria for designating MS4s. And that's to include the size of the discharge, the quantity and nature of the pollutants discharged to waters of the United States, and other relevant factors. We also included miscellaneous and editorial changes, like reorganizing similar information under the same sections and correcting typos, clarifying unclear language, etc. Now to move over to the second portion of our presentation, and that's the importance of reading the general permit and understanding how it applies to your particular MS4. So our components, the components of the best management practices, it does have different components. So a best management practices falls under a minimum control measure. And this best management practices have our activities. So in our stormwater pollution management plan, you let us know what activities it is that you are doing when you are creating your swamp. You're wanting also a measurable goal. So the quantity of that, what you are wanting to do, an implementation schedule. So by when are you going to do complete the quantity that you have set for your MS4, and if applicable, mostly for MCM1, the target audience or pollutant of concern. So for your audiences that you're trying to target, and depending on your level, how many audiences are you able to? So once you have determined your MS4 is eligible for coverage, the swamp must be developed prior to the submission of your NOI. We do have 7 MCMs with an optional 8. And it's important to select your appropriate BMPs per the narrative descriptions in Part 4. While our tables do include the minimum requirements for each MCM, it's important to recognize that each level is required to implement their corresponding BMPs to the maximum extent practicable, not just the minimum measure. And this is our standard layout for our minimum control measures. So for MCM1, public education and outreach. Subsection A, general description of the MCM. What is it that it's entailing? What is it that we're asking for the MS4 to implement when they're fulfilling the requirements of the public education and outreach? Part 1, the requirement for the MCM, specifically for this section, we're talking about target audiences. Who is your target audience depending on your MS4? If you're a traditional MS4, you're targeting your residents. If you're non-traditional, you'll address the community that is being served by the MS4. And of course, that'll depend on who you are. Are you a university, a military base, a prison? And also depending on the level that your MS4 falls under, how many audiences are you expected to reach out to? This MCM public education and outreach MCM1 also does include target pollutant sources that we do have listed in table 3 in our general permit. And as I described earlier, of course, the MCM is made up of BMP. So this is another best management practice, and this is a description. Essentially, it's asking how is it that you're going to use the appropriate educational resources as your best management practices in order to fulfill the requirements of public education and outreach. So if the permittee has a public website, it lets you know, like, you should be posting the SWMP and annual reports to the website, and over the permit term, depending on your level, there is a number of BMPs you're required to implement. And this is the table that we are referring to, table 4. We have our activity, the social media post and social media campaign. We are detailing the activity requirements and the implementation schedule. So, and within this implementation schedule, it also includes the measurable goal. So posting a minimum of 4 times each year on a minimum of 1 social media platform, and making a minimum of 1 post per quarter, and all quarterly posts must be visible by attendees for the full year each year. Another MCM that we're wanting to go over is illicit discharge detection and elimination. We have the importance of the program development. So all permittees shall develop, implement, and enforce a program that investigates, detects, and eliminates illicit discharges into the small MS4. The program must include a plan to detect and address non-stormwater discharges, including illegal dumping to the small MS4. Within this section of the MCM3, there's a list of allowable non-stormwater discharges and requirements for all permittees. This is taken from the table that we have for MCM3. This particular activity, as described in Part 4, D3, we do reference back to the narrative descriptions in our permit. Again, as a reminder that depending on the level of your MS4, there are different requirements that are expected of you, and not just what's being presented on this table. Another example we include are the inspections. The permittee shall conduct inspections in response to complaints, and shall conduct follow-up inspections to ensure that corrective measures have been implemented by the responsible party. So for this particular example, the permit is asking that the MS4 be the one to describe their procedures, and once they describe them, then they have to abide by them. It is slightly different from previous example, and you are setting up your own procedures based off of the BMPs in this 2024 permit. Here are our resources where you can find the 2024 general permit fact sheet and response to comments that we took in order to make our final version of the general permit. You can find the final NIPD small MS4 urbanized area clarification rule and the resources to the 2020 census in urban areas on our TCQ webpage. And now we're opening the floor to questions.
Here we have a question about have we stated when the NOI must be submitted by for the new general permit. Yes, the application or the NOI for the 2024 general permit must be submitted by February 11th of 2025. So that is coming up in about, I guess, 1, 2, 3 months from now. So the applications will be due by February 11th, 2025. Whether you submit a notice of intent or a waiver, whatever is applicable to you. They are both due at the same time. And prior to that, you must develop your stormwater management program.
We have another question that says, where can we find the urban areas maps?
The urban area maps, in my presentation, you'll have a link to that, but they are currently on our Phase 2 MS4 General Permit webpage, so we will include the link for that as well.
Okay, and another question, will we be going over the new electronic reporting system?
Great question. This is a technical webinar. We are not going to really go over the electronic reporting system itself. We do have on our YouTube channel, on our TCQ YouTube channel, and we can include a link on this website as well, on this chat, sorry, for you to access it. It is a 2.5-hour webinar that EPA, and we hosted, and EPA gave part of the presentation, and then Hannah with my team did a live demo of the system so you can see it in action. Later today, we're going to have a presentation of overall of the system, but not exactly do a demo. For that, we do recommend that you watch that 2.5-hour webinar so that you can see a live demo of the system.
Okay, we have another one. Will this upcoming annual report be considered year 6 since it was a continuation of the previous SWMP?
Jesse, would you please answer that question?
Yeah, so we've created a nice little diagram that can go a little bit into depth about the extra year 6, or in some cases year 7 for certain MS4s.
Okay, we have another one. When does the new definition of urbanized areas from the 2020 population census become effective when it comes to jurisdiction being a county instead of a state? For example, is this outside the scope of this presentation?
I'm trying to understand the question. I understand the first part. So the urbanized area term is no longer a term that's used. So EPA last year in 2023, as a result of the 2020 census, the 2020 census no longer has the term urbanized area. So EPA removed that from our Phase 2 MS4 program federal regulations. So the term urbanized area is no longer used. Instead, we are using the term urban area with a population of at least 50,000 people or more. That replaced urbanized area. So it's the same thing. It's a notwithstanding same definition. It is now, instead of being called urbanized area, it's being called urban area with a population of 50,000 people or more. That was effective last year. I can't remember exactly what, I think it was June of 2023 when EPA created and finalized that rule. And so now that is why we are implementing it in our 2024 general permit that was just issued August 15 of this year. Now, the part that I don't understand is when it comes to jurisdiction being a county instead of a state, for example. That I don't think I understand exactly your question. So if you can elaborate, great. Otherwise, please send it to SWGP so we can address it more specifically for your needs.
Okay, and it says, okay, so the last permit term was from 2019 to 2023, meaning my MS4 SWMP only covered 2019 to 2023. There was no guidance for 2024. So what should a 2024 annual report be on? Should it be a continuance of year 5, essentially a year 6? It seems this question sort of got answered, but I'm assuming we'll go over the chart later. I don't have a written year 6, so I'm not sure what to report on.
So Jesse, I will take the lead on this. But yes, Jesse will have more on the last slides presentation we have on annual report specifically. He's going to be answering this question.
So I think the continuation part we don't necessarily address in the presentation later on for the annual report. But I do want to go ahead and go on the record to say that for the extended years, so again, in some cases, year 6 or 7, what we've been advising for MS4s to do has been to continue the implementation of the SWMP for those activities that are able to be continued for extended years. So certain BMPs where they're implemented annually, or they're implemented not just for a single year, but throughout the general permit term, we're expecting MS4s to continue those through this extension period for year 6 and year 7. Additionally, we'll get a little bit more into how to report these for the annual report purposes. Again, that's for year 6, and I'll go a little bit more into depth into what activities and what kind of schedules you're going to include in which report.
Okay, and we have one that says, going back to Rebecca's presentation, what is the best source for the list of streams with and without TDMLS and applicable control constituents?
That is published already. Somebody had a question in the chat, and I answered it where I provided the link to so it was by Anonymous at 2:02, and I answered at 2:04. So if you go to that web link, you're going to see information about projects with the TMDL, and you can learn everything about you want about TMDLs and implementation plans, but there's a spreadsheet that's an Excel spreadsheet that you can download called the Summary of Completed TMDLs and I-Plans. And you can go in there, you can find the water body that your MS4 is discharging into, and then there's going to be a link to the right-hand side of that spreadsheet where you can click to find the TMDL and the I-Plan for that water body. Again, that's posted. The link is posted on a published question and answer.
Okay, and we'll take this last question before we go on a break. It says, will the year 6 report be reported electronically or by hard copy as in the past?
The year 6 annual report and any year 7, some people also have a year 7, needs to be submitted by paper or hard copy. Any annual report required by the 2019 general permit is submitted by hard copy or paper.
Okay. And last one, is a flood control district applicable for waiver 1 when they're fully located within another MS4? They only own land, maintain ponds, and they have no full-time staff. They have no population since they only operate lakes.
So that is a very specific question. I do recommend that you submit that to SWGP, but it all stems as to who is the owner or who is the operator who maintains an MS4 system. So if you own or maintain or operate an MS4 system, then you are an MS4. But if you hire somebody else to operate it and maintain it, then they become the MS4. So it's a little bit tricky, so we probably do need to find a little bit more specifics to fully answer that question.
This is Regulatory Guidance Document 646. Again, it was created by SBLGA according to the requirements of the 2024 general permit. It was developed as a resource for level 1 and 2 MS4s to develop their SWMP, as they may not have the same resources or maybe experience as maybe the level 3 and 4 MS4s. However, it can be used as a guidance for any MS4 for both level 3 and 4 MS4s by modifying it to include the additional required best management practices or BMPs for each minimum control measure. And this is also not a requirement to develop your SWMP. This is just a guidance document that's out there for you if you need it or you would like to use it as reference. And it's also available for download on SBLGA's assistance page, which we can also provide the link to as well if you're having difficulty finding it. So to begin, this template was designed again by our SBLGA team, and they designed it to meet all of the permit requirements. So it does have all of the permit requirements for level 1 and 2 MS4s. Again, if you're a level 3 or 4 MS4, you can modify, you already have to do what a level 1 and 2 MS4 has to do. You just need to add additional BMPs as required for each MCM. And as mentioned earlier, MCM 7 for industrial stormwater sources, that only applies to level 4 MS4, so that's also not included within the template, as well as the optional 8th minimum control measure. So if that's applicable to you, you need to add those as well to your SWMP. So to begin, MCM1 is for public education and outreach. And at a minimum, that must include the following target audiences. So as Monica mentioned earlier, if you're a traditional MS4, you need to address the residents that you're serving. And if you're a non-traditional MS4, like a university, a prison, a MUD, transportation authority, things like that, then you must address the community that you're serving. And depending on how many target audiences you have, that determines how many target pollutants you must address. So you need one target pollutant for each target audience. So I included an example on the table below of what that may look like for you. So for example, if your target audience is the general public, some common target pollutants are for pet waste, grass clippings, illegal dumpings, things like that, or, you know, for restaurants, grease and oil are a common pollutant that need to be addressed. And as a note, you can use the same pollutant more than once if necessary, and you can also change annually as needed through a notice of change. You can also partner with other MS4 operators if desired to maximize cost effectiveness and resources, but in order to do so, in order to be considered supporting an MS4, you have to do at least one of the following. So not all of those, but either plan or assist with the planning, coordinate volunteers, contribute supplies or some kind of materials, help distribute those materials, or provide some kind of financial support. So one of those factors or elements must be met in order to be considered supporting an activity for this MCM. And depending on the level is, you know, dependent on how many BMPs that you're required to implement. So level 1 has the least amount at 3 BMPs, and it goes up as typically population goes up with level 3 and 4. Therefore, they have more BMPs to implement. So levels 3 and 4 have 5 BMPs to implement for this MCM. Again, you should, for the template, or if you don't want to use that, that's fine as well, but you need to identify how BMPs relate to your target audience, and they should obviously be relevant to the target audience and target pollutant for that audience. So for example, you also need to include specific BMPs if you discharge to an impaired water body, like Rebecca was talking about earlier, in order to reduce the discharges of those pollutants of concern, or POCs. And I also included some examples of targeted outreach that you know, that it may look something like that for you. So for example, if you send a newsletter to automotive mechanics about the new ordinances that there are against illegal dumping and illegal discharges, or some kind of electronic fact sheet about hazardous household waste disposal that's sent to residents after they apply for municipal trash or recycling services. And again, you can change these BMPs during the permit cycle. If you through your assessment and review annually, you determine that they're no longer appropriate. And again, you can also record this, or you should record this in your Stormwater Management Program. This is just an example of what that can look like for you in your stormwater management plan. So the BMP activity, the target audience for that BMP or activity, the target pollutant or pollutants, and the measurable goal for that BMP and activity. And then MCM2 is similar, but it's for public involvement and participation. Again, you can also partner with another MS4 in order to meet these requirements, as long as you meet one of those elements that's listed there. And the required number of BMPs is dependent on your MS4 level. So you must implement the appropriate number depending on your level. And this is just another example of what a chart might look like in your stormwater management program for MCM2. And I've taken these from the template as well. So if you want to, create something like that, or if you want to use the template as well. Part of MCM3 is for illicit discharge detection and elimination is to maintain a current and accurate MS4 map. So on the right is an example of an MS4 map that has all of the boundaries, the waterways, roadways, and the MS4 outlet or outfalls that are designated by the red circles. And the map must include all of those outfalls or the location of all of those outfalls that are operated by the MS4 that discharge into waters of the US, and then as well as the location and the name of all of those surface waters that are receiving those discharges. And you also need to include the date of the last revision, so the last time that you revised the MS4 map. One of the required elements is also for everyone, for all MS4s, is to educate and train employees on illicit discharge detection and elimination. So the measurable goal for that is to conduct at least one training annually, and that's for 100% of the field staff for which that's applicable. So those field staff that may encounter or observe those illicit discharges as part of their normal job responsibilities. So not necessarily all of your MS4 staff. And you also need to maintain a attendance log and document those training activities. And figure 5, which is on the right, is an example of that training log. And that's also within the template as well. As part of MCM3, another required element is to maintain and facilitate a public reporting method. The public needs to have at least one. You can have more than one, but at a minimum, at least one method in which they can report illicit discharges or illegal dumping or any other kind of water quality impacts that are associated with these discharges. And that can be via web page, hotline, a pamphlet, phone number, etc., which I've included on the right as just some examples in which you can do that. And then all MS4s must also publicize the reporting method at least twice annually in a way that's designed to reach most of your intended audience. So there's a little bit of flexibility with that, but it does need to be, the public reporting method must be advertised at least twice per year. And if you do have a public website, you're required to continuously maintain and publicize that public website. So you can't take the site down and then bring it back up. It needs to be continuously available to the public. And in order to determine the effectiveness of your publicized reporting method, you also need to develop and implement some kind of tracking system in order to estimate what percentage of the intended audience is reached. And there's flexibility with that as well on what kind of tracking system that you should choose to implement. As part of MCM3, you also need to develop and maintain illicit discharge detection, elimination, response procedures. So the MS4 needs to describe how they're going to monitor and respond to those kind of complaints and emergencies. And those procedures should include something like emergency contacts or emergency response contact information, how to monitor and manage incoming complaints, detailed instructions on how your MS4 will respond to those emergency spills, and those procedures need to be reviewed and updated if necessary at least once per year for each permit year in order to address any changes that need to be made or make improvements. You also need to investigate and eliminate illicit discharges and illegal dumping. So more specifically, you need to respond to all high priority discharges within 24 hours. And as a common or an example would be of a high priority discharge would be something like a sanitary sewer discharge. And you know, your reports need to be prioritized based on the risk of pollution. And regardless of if it's a high priority discharge or not, every source investigation that's conducted needs to have an investigation worksheet, which I'll show on the next slide, completed with it. And of course, if there's any illicit flows that are believed to be an immediate threat to the human health or the environment, you should notify TCEQ immediately. And if possible, or if applicable, you need to notify the responsible party and require them to perform any necessary corrective actions to eliminate that illicit discharge. And if that's not applicable to you, such as if your MS4 is a level 2B, which is, again, those non-traditionals, and you don't have that enforcement authority, that may be the TCEQ regional office that should be notified. And if that is the case for you, you need to specify within your stormwater management plan which agency that is, as well as their contact information. So this is that worksheet that I was describing earlier. So this is an example of what that could look like for those investigations or those worksheets that need to be conducted for every IDDE or illicit discharge detection and elimination investigation. I didn't include all of the worksheet, but you also should include things like what you observed, if follow-up is necessary, if TCEQ or another regulatory agency needs to be contacted, information like that. And then also MCM3 has a requirement to develop and maintain inspection procedures. So you must develop some kind of written procedures that describe the basis for conducting inspections in response to those complaints from that public reporting mechanism. And those inspection instructions or procedures must be reviewed at least once annually in order to make any changes or make improvements. But it is a requirement to review those procedures at least once. And again, this is a little bit more of what that can look like, such as the complainant name and their contact information, as well as any additional notes that you want to include or that are relevant. And then for level 2 MS4s, if it's applicable to you and you have any on-site sewage facilities or OSSFS in the MS4 area, you need to keep track of their status each year and investigate and address 100% of all of those complaints that are reported through the MS4's public reporting mechanisms. as well as developing procedures to address failing and poorly maintained systems. And the inventory of those on-site sewage facilities and their status need to be reviewed and updated at least once annually to address any changes or if there's an addition by your MS4. And should your MS4 discharge bacteria to an impaired water body that has an approved TCEQ and EPA approved TMDL, like Rebecca was mentioning earlier, your BMPs should also be specific to include how you're going to identify and address the failing systems and address the poor maintenance of these on-site sewage facilities. MCM4 is for construction site stormwater runoff control. The first required element is to develop and maintain city ordinances. So if you're not implementing that optional 8th MCM, you need to require all construction site operators to comply with the construction general permit or the CGP TXR 150,000. And those, if you're familiar with the construction general permit, those require erosion and sediment controls in order to reduce or minimize stormwater discharges from leaving the site. You also need to implement site plan review procedures for reviewing construction site plans. And if you are a non-traditional MS4, you must conduct those inspections of sites that are operated by the MS4 or contractors that are located within the MS4's regulated area. And as a note, you can also require and accept the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, or the SWMP, as it's commonly known, for review as part of your site plan review procedures. And again, those need to be reviewed at least once annually. And then you also need to implement those site inspection procedures for inspecting any active construction projects. And for you need to conduct at least 80% of active, that's the keyword of active construction sites annually, according to your established procedures. So we give you, there's a little bit of leeway for that. It's not necessarily 80% of all your active construction sites, but 80% of active sites according to your MS4's established procedures. And on the right is an example from the template of what a construction site inspection report can look like. And it has a lot of good details like the inspection date, site name, TIPD's permit number, which would be the CGP or TXR 15 number of the site, if applicable. And based on any inspection findings, you should take all of the necessary actions when following up to ensure that there's compliance with the 2024, TXR 04 or small MS4 general permit and your SWMP. And these follow-up inspections, and if there's any enforcement actions, also need to be tracked and maintained within your SWMP so that if necessary, TCEQ can review those. And another element for MCM4 is to create procedures for processing public comments. So kind of similarly to the mechanism for public reporting for illicit discharges, you also need to develop and implement procedures for receiving and considering information that's submitted by the general public. So throughout the permit term, you need to maintain at least one web page, hotline, email, or some kind of similar method in which the public can submit information and you can receive that information. And those procedures for processing those public comments need to be reviewed at least once annually. And lastly, or close to lastly, one of the required elements for MCM4 is to educate and train your employees at least once annually. Those employees being 100% of all your MS4 staff whose primary job duties are related to implementing the construction stormwater program. So not necessarily all of your MS4 staff, but 100% of those staff whose primary job duties are to implement that program. And of course, document and record the training activities that you choose to implement. And on the right is an example of what that log sheet can look like, including the training attendance log and how the training was provided or the mechanism in which it was provided. MCM5 also has a requirement for all MS4s to develop and maintain city ordinances. So you must use an ordinance or some kind of regulatory mechanism in order to address post-construction runoff from new development and redevelopment projects, and establish, implement, and enforce a requirement that owners or operators of these new developments and redeveloped sites must design and install and implement a combination of structural and non-structural best management practices or BMPs that are appropriate and protective of water quality. And if construction of these structural controls aren't feasible due to whatever reasons, such as space limitations, health, safety concerns, cost effectiveness, etc., you can also propose an alternative approach to TCEQ, and we can go over that with you. And also, just like all of the other procedures, these ordinances or regulatory mechanisms need to be reviewed at least once during the permit term to address changes and make improvements if necessary. MCM5 also, just like the other minimum control measures, there's a requirement for record keeping, so document and maintain those records of any enforcement actions and make them available for review by TCEQ if and when requested. So you must maintain 100% of those enforcement records that are taken each year. And you also must create a maintenance plan for structural stormwater control measures. So that includes maintenance that you perform as the MS4 and then maintenance that's performed by the owner or the operator of a new development or a redeveloped site. And again, this is what an example of MCM5 can look like for a worksheet that describes the long-term maintenance of post-construction stormwater control measures. You don't have to include it exactly that way, but this would be a good resource if you need guidance on that. And then lastly, MCM6 is for pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. So to begin, you should create an inventory of facilities or MS4 owned facilities and the stormwater controls that they operate. So for example, on the right is an example inventory worksheet that includes the facility name, the TIPD's permit number, which you can find through our central registry database, or water quality general permit search page is also a good resource to find those permit numbers. And those include things like recycling and composting facilities, fuel and material storage sites, landfills, hazardous waste disposal facilities, public work yards, etc. And that inventory needs to be assessed at least once per year in order to address any changes to that inventory and the stormwater controls that they operate. You also need to train all the employees and any contractors, if applicable, that are involved in implementing MCM6, and that needs the training needs to happen at least once annually, so once per year. And as well as developing any contract oversight procedures, if that's applicable to you, if you have any contractors If you do have contractors that are hired to perform maintenance activities for your MS4, there must be some kind of contract in place that requires them to comply with all of the stormwater control measures, including good housekeeping operations. And lastly, you need to develop a set of pollution prevention measures to reduce the discharge of pollutants. And that is, I'll show you that on the next slide. So on the right, I included some potential pollutants that you may have, as well as their sources. So you can do something like that. And as well as develop pollution prevention inspection procedures. So at least once annually, you need to visually inspect 100% of all pollution prevention measures implemented at your MS4 owned and operated facilities to ensure that they're working properly, as well as develop some kind of written procedures that describe the frequency of inspections and how you're going to conduct those inspections. And those inspection procedures need to be reviewed at least once annually. You also need to develop structural control maintenance procedures, so at least once annually, if necessary, perform maintenance on those stormwater structural controls and develop some kind of written procedures that describe the frequency of those inspections, how you're going to conduct those inspections, and those, again, need to be reviewed and updated at least once annually. So on the right bottom side of the screen is an example of what a structural control inspection log can look like. So you can have maybe in one column the structural control, the inspection frequency, and then the maintenance requirements that you're doing. And then above that is another example of a log sheet that you can modify as needed. And lastly, if your MS4 discharges to an impaired water body that has an approved TMDL and stormwater is listed as having the potential to cause or contribute to the impairment, then you'll need to identify the controls that you use on site to target those pollutants of concern, as well as set benchmarks and measurable goals and develop a monitoring and assessment plan. And that's also included within the template as well.
All right, so I'm Casey. I'll be going over the overview of the application process. So kind of as a review with the renewal application deadline requirements. So currently we're in the 180-day renewal period for existing small MS4s. This was to develop and update their Stormwater Management Program and submit your NOI or submit your waiver for TCQ to review your permit coverage. So this time frame allows applicants to firstly reorganize your stormwater management program to separate existing MCM1 into MCMs 1 and 2 as defined in the general permit, to update activities, BMPs, and measurable goals as appropriate for consistency with the comprehensive general permit, and lastly, to prepare and submit your NOI or waiver as applicable electronically in the new Net MS4 system. As far as newly regulated small MS4s, application and deadline requirements, they still follow the newly regulated small MS4s. Once confirmed, will be required to submit the application within the 180-day renewal period. Once again, this time frame allows applicants to both develop their stormwater management program as defined in the general permit, include activities, BMPs, and measurable goals as appropriate with the consistency with the comprehensive general permit, and then give you time to prepare and submit your NOI or waiver as applicable electronically in the new MS4 system. And so then we'll go over kind of the general basics of it. So, step one, if you don't already have an account in CDX or the Central Data Exchange, you would create an account and choose your role, and we'll go into that a little later. And then add Net MS4 program service area, and then request user permissions for your specific MS4s that you're responsible for. So inside CDX account roles, so CDX has two main roles, your signatory and preparer. Users with the signatory role, you can request, view, edit, sign, and or manage permissions. And then users with the preparer role, you'll only be able to do view and edit permissions. And so then inside MS4 user permissions, so a little bit more specifics. Users with signatory role, they will be able to view, edit, sign, and or manage permissions. To request signed permission, users must meet the signatory requirements under R30 Text Administrative Code 305-44A. What that is, for municipalities, state, federal, or other public agencies, the application shall be signed by either a principal executive officer or a ranking elected official. A few examples as far as what does not meet these requirements: environmental consultants, environmental engineers, public work directors, stormwater inspectors, and city secretaries, and etc. So, once you've created your CX account, added NetMS4 as a service area, and the next question is like, how do you get to your MS4? So, first thing is you'll have to request permissions. So, step one is you'll select the button Find MS4 Regulated Community on the homepage. It's that first image circled. And then you can use multiple things to search for this. Mainly, the two easiest ones is your individual permit number or your MS4 name. And so you'll type that in the search window and you'll filter it, and then you'll get the results for the MS4s that match those criteria. And then that's how you'll request permissions. And so as far as requesting your permissions, so you'll actually, once you've filtered it and you find the MS4s that you're wanting to select permissions for, on the leftmost column, you'll see the little boxes. You will check the ones that are applicable to you that you're trying to request permissions for. And then at the bottom, you'll select the Request Permissions button. And so once you select that button, a little window will come up and prompt you. And this is where you'll actually select which level, what you're wanting to have permissions for your MS4s. Kind of as a note, preparer roles in CDX program, they will only be able to view and edit. Sign and manage will be grayed out and they will not be able to select those boxes. And so that's just one thing to make note of. If you're, depending on your role with your MS4, it'll dictate what you can select. And so then you'll check the boxes that are applicable to your scenario and you'll hit submit, and the request will be sent to us and we will review and approve them and go from there. So, what happens once you get access to your MS4? And so, once you have view and edit permissions at a minimum, you'll be able to actually access your NOI or waiver form. And so on your home screen, it will view all NOIs or waivers that you have access to. And so then you'll click the Actions button and then the Manage Coverage Request. And this is how you'll get to the actual NOI forms. And another note, users with signatory role will have the Action Center. Individuals with the preparer role will not. The EPA's explanation of that is as signatory, you have things requested of you for you to approve or go through. As a preparer, nothing will be requested of you besides filling out the forms, and so that's why it will not be visible on your CDX account. So continuing, getting into your actual NOI your form. Once you go into the actions and manage coverage request, you'll click the little drop down menu in the action to edit your form. And I guess one to note that we've noticed just from helping is there will be two line items. You'll have your previous authorization at the bottom, and at the top you'll have your current kind of already in queue NOI or waiver form that will show up as a draft in status. And so you'll click the action drop down and then you'll select edit and it will take you to the actual NOI or waiver form to fill out. So, for existing MS4s that already have data, it will already be pre-populated into an MS4 system. And so that you'll either be loaded into what you previously were. So if you're NOI, it'll be NOI, or if you're a waiver application, it will be pre-populated as a waiver. However, permittees may request changes to application type. So if applicable, based on eligibility criteria, just reach out to us. So please contact the TCQ Stormwater team at our swgp@tcq.texas.gov email, and we can facilitate that change over to your application type. As far as new MS4 requests, so as far as any newly identified MS4s, so you won't be pre-populated into the system, but MS4 does have an option to kind of help us notify if you are in that category. And so at the home screen, if you search for your MS4 and you don't find that you're in the system, there's a button at the top that says Add MS4 Regulated Community. And so you'll click that button and it'll prompt you with a form to fill out. It basically just has your basic information, coverage information, and then approval information. So it's just a form that you fill out. As long as you fill out all the required fields, it will then submit it and we will review it and go from there. So what does the application process look like for an NOI? So prior to starting your NOI, develop your Stormwater Management Program, and then actually filling out your NOI. And so you'll have the categories listed in there. So you have your MS4 entity information, application fee, MS4 contact information, your core data form, regulated entity information, your standing with TCEQ, so your compliance history, and then water body information. Your Stormwater Management Program, has it been implemented? Is it published? And then where you actually start choosing what we went over a little bit in the previous presentation of going through your MCMs and choosing the line items. So MCM 1 through 6, and then if applicable 7 through 8. There is a option at the very end to put notes and additional information. So if you have anything you want to say, you can write it in there and we'll review it. Throughout this process, from start to finish, before you submit it, just make sure you pay that application fee and record it in the application fee portion of the NOI. And then the last step would be, once it's ready, you can flag it for it to be signed and certified. From what I've noticed, it is one step. So your NOI should be ready to go prior to having it certified, because when you sign for it, it will submit it to us for review. As far as application process for the waiver, filling out the waiver, it's pretty similar as far as the first few, where you have your MS4 entity information, MS4 contact, core data form, your regulated entity information, your standing, and then that's where it'll differ, where you start getting into your actual waiver eligibility. It's pretty user-friendly, where you'll just go through. It's pretty similar to the previous one, just filling out to make sure you still apply for the waiver. And then, putting any additional notes or information that you'd like to include, and then you'll sign and submit the waiver. And then once with the waiver, there is no application fee. So as far as what does it look like after you submit your NOI or waiver, so we will conduct an administrative review of your application, and we'll be looking for deficiencies and items requiring attention. So what are some of the things that we'll be reviewing? We'll be going over your compliance history. We'll check to make sure there's no delinquent or outstanding fees. An important note here is it is not specific to just our program area. So if there's anywhere else where you have any outstanding fees, it will show up, and those will have to get paid. So you have to reach out to, if you have any like landfills or anything like that that needs any environmental fees paid, they'll need to be caught up prior to this getting submitted. You'll need to submit a core data form, and we'll make sure to check for that it's up to date and doesn't have any issues. And then application fee for your NOIs. And the last one is we're going to just double check to make sure the signatory certification meets those requirements for signatory rule. So continuation, what does it look like once your NOI is reviewed and approved? So it's pretty streamlined. So once you get your approval, you'll receive confirmation in MS4 system that your application has been approved. We kind of follow the similar format of when you were approved for your access roles. And then the letter and certification will be sent automatically as an email from the MS4 system. And then a nice feature is the certification notification will be sent to all users of that MS4. And so, it kind of let everyone know what's going on. As far as a note, a note changes for information in your NOI or waiver, they will be submitted through a notice of change through MS4 system. So once you get your 2024 permit renewal through, you'll have the option. It'll be the same kind of format where you'll click the actions for that authorization, and you'll see that it will show, you want to submit a notice of change or even a notice of termination. So continuation of our review, as far as denials go or notice deficiencies. So if you receive a notification from the MS4 system that your application was denied, you'll see a note from TCEQ with the comments and what needs to be addressed in the resubmittal of your application. Kind of one thing to make a note of is while your reapplication, when you reapply after a denial, it will show a new date for your NOI being submitted. The original date for the first submission will be the one that we use for documentation. And then, for example, your application was deficient in information on the core data form. So, we'll deny it, make a note of it, and it'll bounce. And you'll get an email notification on what the issue was. And we just ask, you hit the reapply button, open the form back up. The nice thing is all your previous information will still be there. You'll just need to update the information that we found deficient. And then, denials, if, things that we could find for a denial, incorrect application type. If that happens, we'll get we'll get it rolling to where you'll switch over to the other style. Unsatisfactory compliance history rating. So if that comes up, that will be where we'll have to address it with individual permit. Outstanding fees, unpaid delinquent fees. That's one of the things where you'll just reach out to revenue and get any of those outstanding fees, if it's outside of our program, kind of handled. And then what could be an example of this? If waiver eligibility is not met for population criteria, or your MS4 discharged into a water body with approved TMDL with stormwater controls. And so those are kind of some of the ones that could lead to a denial. But as far as it goes, when we do deny it, we put a comment in there and it will be recorded on there. So you'll be able to easily determine what the issue was and kind of what the next steps need to be to move forward.
And my name is Rebecca Villalba. I am going to give you a short presentation on the connection between the application and the SWMP. You have now heard Hannah go over the SWMP template, basically what are the SWMP requirements. And then now you heard Casey go over a little bit about the application process. Again, to see how NetMS4 works, you need to go see or watch and listen to the YouTube NetMS4 webinar that we had several weeks ago. It is on our YouTube channel. It's 2.5 hours. It has great question and answers in there as well. So we do recommend that you go watch that, because there is exactly what you might need to know and see on how to navigate NetMS4. So this is just a quick wrap up regarding the application and the SWMP. So first of all, why does the SWMP need to be updated? I mean, even now we're getting questions on our chat regarding this. Then a little bit about how the permit, the SWMP, and the NOI work with each other, how they interact. And then the SWMP and the NOI connection, and then tying it all in with your annual report to the NOI. So why does the SWMP need to be developed or updated? The permit requires it. The rules require that you develop a stormwater management program. So just because we went to a comprehensive permit, just because we are now in NetMS4 and you don't need to submit the SWMP to us, does not mean that you do not have to develop one. You need to develop one if you're a new MS4. If you have already an existing MS4, that you've been regulated, then you need to update it to meet the new permit requirements under the comprehensive general permit. So a stormwater management program is still needed. It is a core item of your meeting the permit requirements. So make sure that you understand and you read the general permit where it says existing MS4s need to develop and update the SWMP under the general permit prior to submittal of the NOI for coverage. So if for some reason you decide to just go click, click, click everywhere and sign and submit, your signatory is going to be making a federal offense. This is not just a state system now. This is a federal system that you're entering information into. So you want to make sure that you do have that stormwater management program available, ready. You also need to post it on your website. So you need to have something. You need to develop it and update it. We get questions from people wondering, do I still need to do that? If you're a newly regulated MS4, or if we ever designate somebody as a new MS4, then the permit also says that they must develop a SWMP under the general permit prior to submittal of the NOI. So it is a very clear permit requirement. And again, those requirements in the permit come from the federal rules. So the operator will have to acknowledge that the SWMP has been developed or modified according to the provisions of the permit. To the right here of the screen, you see the first snapshot or screenshot from the Net MS4 system, where it gives you the different sections that you have to submit and answer questions. So the one that we have circled in red is Stormwater Management Program. When you click on that section, it's going to reveal several questions that you need to answer, and then it'll go through all the MCMs. So you need to have your SWMP ready in order to answer those questions. And then, like I said, at the end, it'll have a section that shows on the bottom of the screen where your signatory, who is your elected official, that city manager, your county judge, your commissioners, your mayor, whoever it is, that's signing. They're saying, I acknowledge that the SWMP has been developed according to the provisions of the general permit. And they have to answer yes. If they say no, it's not going to let them go. So you have to say yes. And if you say yes, you must have done it. And then the next question, when you're certifying things, will say, have the program elements in the previous SWMP been reassessed and modified, and new program elements been developed and implemented as necessary? So if you're an existing MS4, you need to answer yes, but you only answer yes if you really have done it. If you haven't done it, you need to stop, go back and do it before you continue with this application process. So we want to save you from committing anything illegal. We want you to do the right thing. So make sure you understand that the SWMP is required before you start preparing the NOI. So how the permit, the SWMP, and the NOI interact. So I just mentioned that the general permit is a comprehensive general permit, and it has elements that you must implement. And it's going to, it's a prescriptive permit, so it's going to tell you what you need to do. So you take the permit language, you're going to put it in your SWMP, develop your SWMP using the SWMP template, if you want to, that we have offered. And then once you have your SWMP, that's going to help you fill out the NOI questions. Without it, it's going to be pretty difficult to answer, many of those NOI questions. So to the left, we have here permit language. So permit language here talks about the small MS4 addressing additional target audiences within your MS4 area. So if you're level 1, 2A, or 2B, you don't need additional audiences. You just do whatever is listed on the table 2. But if you're level 3, then you need 1 more audience. If you're level 4, you need 2 more audiences. And then table 2 tells you, the audiences that need to be considered. So if you put this in your SWMP, you say what you are going to be implementing and addressing. Then when you come to MCM1, which is on the right-hand side, this is the screenshot or snapshot of what NetMS4 looks like regarding MCM1. And so then, you get to the question about what are the additional target audiences being addressed? And based on whatever level you've said you are, so in this case, somewhere when the NOI was started, it said that they were level 4. So it says 2 or more additional target audiences are required. So you must check 2 more, and if you don't, the system's not going to let you go. So you need to be ready to know which ones you're going to check, because if you just willy-nilly check whatever, and then later on come back and try to update your SWMP, and then you forget, or whatever, you want to be consistent. So have your SWMP, have it ready, have it open, so that when you prepare the NOI, you can easily answer those questions. So again, your SWMP needs to be prepared so you can answer the questions. So having that SWMP updated acts as your answer key to what the permit is requiring in the NOI, and allows you to go through the NOI process more smoothly and easier for you to process everything. So then the SWMP and the NOI connection. Without knowing what BMPs your MS4 plans to implement, you will not be able to complete each MCM section. Each MCM section is going to ask you how many BMPs you are going to be implementing, and there's going to be these radial buttons with yes or no. And you must say yes to the number of BMPs that are required so that you meet the minimum. So here it says you must answer yes to the correct number of BMPs to qualify. So if you don't, it's not going to let you move on. So you want to be able to know which are the BMPs or activities that you have selected in your SWMP that you selected from the permit. So if a section is not fully completed, it will not let you move on. It'll flag it and you can move on. BMPs within the SWMP must at a minimum meet the requirements of the permit. You can choose more if you want to, but at a minimum, you must include what is minimum required for your level. We always encourage you to do more or implement more BMPs, more activities if you want to, and if so, then the NOI, if it doesn't have it, will not be the place to include additional or extra ones. But in the annual report, you'll have the opportunity to include those to give yourself credit. The NOI in that MS4 is built to meet the minimum requirements of the general permit. The NOI in the annual report. So now you saw how the permit says things, then you implement those requirements in your SWMP. Then from the SWMP, you fill out the NOI. Well, then that's leading you to the next step, annual report. Every year you need to submit an annual report. And again, this year, this permit cycle is going to be calendar year. So once you submit your NOI, NetMS4 is going to have that information in its memory, is going to keep it. And when you have to submit your annual report next, it's going to pull that information, it's going to remember, it's going to say, oh, your MS4X. In your NOI, you said you were going to be doing this BMPs, these activities. Did you do it? Did you not do it? You know, who was responsible for that activity? If somebody was responsible for it, what's their name? What did they do? So in the annual report is where you're going to give more information that the NOI didn't ask you to submit. So in the annual report, it's going to pull the BMPs, but then in the annual report, you're going to say the responsible parties if you were sharing some of those things. And again, if you did select more BMPs and maybe they're not in your NOI, but they are in your SWMP, in the annual report is where you're going to have the ability to include any additional BMPs that you selected. So one of the examples of the question that you're going to see if you are relying on another government entity or some other party to implement the BMP, it will ask you if you rely on another government entity for these requirements, yes or no. If you say yes, then it's going to ask you for that information. So that's how doing all this work for your SWMP and NOI is going to make the annual reporting process smoother, streamline it. So just for a quick wrap up, we have an annual report template that addresses the major changes to MCM 1 and 2 and is going to be applicable to all levels of the small MS4, regulated under the small MS4. Both in the permit section C1 of part 4 and in the NOI, the operator must indicate that the SWMP has been updated and meets the general permit requirements. So don't forget that. And then the updated SWMP will make the application process more streamlined, given that it contains the BMPs and options your MS4 is choosing to implement. So that will make your annual reporting process a little bit easier, as well as then you'll have, you're going to be able to clearly see what you're implemented and what you completed or what you accomplished through the whole annual reporting period. So again, this is what we want you to see, the connection between the permit, the SWMP, the NOI, and then the annual report. They all are going to be connected and they're all going to be an integral part of each other. So the effort and the time you spend with the MS4 SWMP developing it, the easier you're going to have for your NOI submittal and also for your annual report reporting. So that concludes this quick wrap up of the connection between the SWMP, the NOI, and the annual report.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to make sure that I can be heard and that my screen is up and nice.
Yep, I hear you and I see your presentation. You are good to go.
Perfect. I know some people had a hard time hearing me earlier. I think I might have fixed it, but moving forward, we'll be covering the 2024 Phase 2 MS4 annual reporting. More specifically, we'll go into general overview of what it consists of. What does the MS4 annual report consist of, as well as hopefully I'll be answering some questions for this transition period between the 2019 and the 2024 general permit, and other key information that I think might be useful. So the MS4 annual permit must describe the activities conducted by the MS4 for the annual reporting year. Essentially, this is a summary of what was done in the previous year, how was the progress for the MS4 for that year, were things completed successfully, were there some deficiencies where maybe we need to address, are there just in general some BMPs that were implemented that were not as effective as we thought we were going to be. And this is where you communicate with TCEQ exactly what's going on with the MS4 BMPs. MS4s are required to report on a calendar year for the new general permit, and that consists of January 1st to December 31st. There were other options in the 2019 general permit, which we'll discuss a little bit more. And they must be submitted within 90 days at the end of each reporting year. We are using the APA Net MS4 reporting system for this, so keep that in mind. We are also transitioning not only for different terms, but also we're going from paper forms to doing this in a reporting website. A little summary of what the annual report consists of. Of course, the summary of activities to begin with, the status of compliance for the MS4, an assessment of BMPs. So we want to know what the BMPs, how exactly are they performing? Is it giving you any are you making any progress towards your goals? If you said you were going to give out 100 pamphlets in 2 events, were you able to do that? Were you only able to make 50? What was the reason? Was an event canceled? This is where we want to hear you out, and obviously give us a summary of your success. We want to hear what's been going great, what hasn't been going great, the results of any benchmark or monitoring that you might have been performing for your MS4, as well as a summary of impaired water body and TMDL activities. And all of this is the annual report. Again, the main idea is we want to know how the MS4 is doing, how are things going. So the annual report must include what has been done in the previous year. You're, just like your taxes, you're always going to be reporting on what was done the year prior. While an NOI is pending approval, the annual report may include the reporting of old activities continued from the last permit cycles. This could be the continuance activities that we briefly discussed earlier in the Q&A. As well as a reporting of both old and new activities from the last permit cycle and the draft Stormwater Management Program. So we do want to kind of address one of the or I guess the elephant in the room, there is a transition for the permit year, from the permit year and the fiscal year to the calendar year. As Monica mentioned in one of her slides, a majority of our permittees were reporting on calendar year and permit year. And because of that, we found them to be pretty close enough, aligning pretty close to the day. So they were off by about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So we went with this option because EPA's system was only going to allow us to use one. And again, because we found that the majority was already using these two options, we figured it would probably be the less disturbance for everyone if we transition to calendar. But again, there is some confusion and we can definitely address that here. Starting off with transitioning from the permit year to the calendar year. So I believe the best way to explain that is by setting up a scenario. So we have permittees that report on the permit year and obtains coverage on December 1st. So that is a date that the NOI is approved for the 2024 permit cycle. I'm going to use this really cool feature up here that I found out earlier, the laser. So we were talking about year 6 earlier. Year 6 for those reporting on the permit year will begin on January 24th, 2024, and that will extend until the day that the permittee obtains coverage. So this whole period right here, year 6, will be reported on as year 6. Again, this covers the continuation period that was granted because of the MS4 extension. This period right here will use the old TCEQ form. Once the permittee obtains coverage on December 1st, then we wanted to kind of address this awkward gap right here. So that would be year 1 from December 1st to December 31st of this same year. Again, this is the case if a permittee was to obtain coverage prior to the end of this calendar year. And this will begin the 2024 permit cycle annual reporting period. And then, beginning on January 1st, then we'll begin year 2. There are some cases where these gaps may differ. So the year 6 can move back or forth depending on, when the NOI is approved. So this year 1 may be a little bit shorter. It may not even exist. So permittee might have the year 1 beginning on January 1st for the 2024 permit cycle. And a similar case would be made if this permittee was reporting on the calendar year. The calendar year is a little bit less confusing. We didn't exactly prepare a diagram for that, but it would look pretty similar in the case where this right here would be January 1st of this year and will extend until the date that the permittee obtains coverage. Again, let's say it's December 1st, then they would have year 1 starting after that. Otherwise, if this gap is closed, then year 1 would begin on January 1st of 2025 until the end of the year 2025 on December 31st. Now, for the next scenario, we'll be looking at somebody who's an MS4 that is reporting based on fiscal year. So again, the permittee is reporting on fiscal year for the 2019 permit cycle and obtains coverage on December 1st. Just keeping a pretty similar scenario to the other one. So let's say that their fiscal year begins on October 1st of 2023. Ideally, that would end until September 30th of 2024. That would be their entire fiscal year. They'll be reporting for this one on the 2019 permit cycle. And then because they don't obtain coverage until December 1st, they'll be required to submit another annual report that covers this gap between September 30th and 2024. Once they do obtain coverage, then they'll begin the 2024 permit cycle. And just like the other example, this year 1 could begin on December 1st. It can begin on January 1st. It really just depends on when that NOI is approved. And one of the common questions that we have received is, why can't I do an extended period for December 1st until the 31st on 2025. Simply, that's the way the EPA net MS4 system works. It wouldn't allow us to do an extended period. We can only do calendar periods that are shorter, or exactly to the point, to the dot. We couldn't do a combined form. So that's kind of why we had to, require that year one be so short if that was the timeline. So additional annual report requirements that we wanted to touch on for this presentation include the impaired water bodies. So the annual report will require that MS4 is discharging a pollutant of concern or bacteria, address the activities taken to address the discharge into impaired water bodies, as well as a summary of BMPs used to address the pollutant of concern and sampling results if that is collected by the MS4 as well. For TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads, the annual report will also require that the MS4 addresses a description or schedule of implementation for additional BMPs based on monitoring results to ensure compliance with the TMDLs and the I plans. Again, this is if the water body has a TMDL or an implementation plan. For water bodies that are listed after coverage is approved, just like other annual reports previously done, the MS4 must annually list newly identified water bodies and the pollutants causing the impairment. Again, this is only if that newly impaired water body comes up into the water body that you're discharging onto. A summary of controls implemented to comply with the approved TMDL will also be required if that is the case. The Stormwater Management Program, as well as the annual report, will identify a benchmark for the pollutants of concerns. So benchmarks are designed to assist if determining whether or not the BMP is effective or whether or not an alternative BMP needs to be implemented. And progress towards these benchmarks will be reevaluated annually within the annual report and modified as necessary. Other additional notes that we wanted to make for annual reports. We also mentioned the option of reporting for coalitions under the MS4 permit. So MS4s with a shared stormwater management program or shared responsibilities within will each be required to submit an annual report. Essentially, how this will be working is somebody will do all of the work and everybody else will write their name on a separate sheet of paper and submit that, and everybody gets credit, ideally. So the MS4s can delegate the responsibility of reporting certain activities or BMPs to any MS4 that is within the coalition. In the annual report, the MS4s that are not responsible for reporting can include something like done by MS4 name, and then include their TXR numbers to make sure that we have a reference of who to go to make sure that that BMP was implemented. Additionally, other members that are within the coalition must be listed within the annual report. So because we know it's a little bit difficult to get to your executive officer to sign every report, you may also designate a duly authorized representative. Within the NET MS4 system, they must meet the requirements of 38 TAC 305.128, and this is referring to the signatories to report. They must be delegated to sign annual reports. One thing that I do want to know is if you are delegating a representative to sign these annual reports, the DAR or the duly authorized representative form is not effective until after it is submitted. So you want to make sure that those forms are submitted prior to the submission of the annual report. Additionally, we've had questions about additional BMPs. In some cases, your MS4 has already been implementing some BMPs that are not included in the general permit. As always, we encourage these additional BMPs, although they are not listed or included within the NOI. We do encourage that they continue to be implemented, and we will allow for the MS4 to include these activities from the SWMP into the annual report as well. Other key things to note, annual reports must be submitted on paper, and this is for the 2019 permit cycle. They must use the appropriate TCEQ annual report form, that's 20561, and they must be submitted to the Austin headquarters. Please copy the Stormwater Team MCA 148 and copy the TCEQ regional office that serves your area. For the 2024 permit cycle, annual reports will be submitted electronically through the NET MS4 system. If the permittee does have a public website, then the annual report or the summary of the annual report will be required to be published within that website and must be posted no later than 30 days after the due date. One kind of great thing about this NET MS4 system is with one submission through the NET MS4 system, you will be complete. You would have completed that requirement. You're not required to forward an email or send a summary to your regional office once you have submitted. And just to wrap things up, I do want to go ahead and say thank you to all my team and also provide everyone with more contact information. We do have the 4671 number for all your technical questions. If you want to give us a call, you'll be directed to the front desk in which you can ask for the stormwater representative of the day. You can also send an email to swgp@tceq.texas.gov. For your more administrative questions, you can contact our processing center. That's the 3700 number, or the SW permit at tcq.texas.gov.
So Jesse, we've been having some questions coming in on the chat again with deadline information for submissions. So we had about 3 of them come in. Can we go over that again? So I had one concerning do we need to submit 3 annual reports, year 6, year 7, like for September 30th, 24th, December 1st. And so there's a lot of confusion still on deadlines for submission.
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and start with those. We can go ahead and address those. So I see one submitted at 324. Okay, that one's a little different.
From like 357.
Okay. Oh, I'll start with one earlier. It's the city of DeSoto. So they say we follow the calendar year for the 2019 permit for the activities during January 1st through December 31st, both of 2024. When is the deadline to submit the annual report? So one thing to note, the deadline remains the same for the 2019 permit cycle. That's 30 days after the end of the, not 30 days, I'm so sorry. It's 90 days after, yes, 90 days after the reporting period ends. You will be required to submit the annual report. So there's no change for the 2019 permit cycle. And that's for all of the permit cycles in general. Once you're, hypothetically you're 6 or 7, whenever those end, you have 90 days from the end of that reporting period to submit that annual report. So we have another question. For year 7, how are goals that are not typically addressed during parts of the year outside of that small reporting period intended to be addressed? So I'll answer this kind of try to answer 2 questions that might come up with this. The first is we're expecting a proportional fulfillment of the BMPs. So if you're only reporting on 1 month, or let's say 2 months out of the year, for activities, you're expected to complete about 1/6 of the measurable goal. So if you said you were going to pass out 100 pamphlets, as long as you passed out 1/6 of that, that's what we're aiming for. That's what we're encouraging MS4s to report on. Additionally, for goals that are, or for specific BMPs that are not implemented for that specific time of the year, then you can provide us an explanation of that. We understand that there are some events that only happen for specific times of the year. Those public events specifically, they might be in the spring when the weather is a little bit nicer. You can report that within your annual report and let us know that the events were held earlier in the year, and the weather is not good enough, or it's just not the time of the year where you hold those events. And we have another question that was pretty similar to what I was trying to answer. And it was for those transitioning from fiscal to calendar year who need to submit a year 7, is the expectation for us to meet a full year's worth of BMPs in the shorter period? Essentially, no. Again, the proportional amount of measurable goals is kind of what we're aiming for. And the other question is fiscal year. For those, if they have a fiscal year, we need to submit 3 annual reports, year 6, year 7, and year 1. So I'll go back a little bit to that timeline, just to kind of have it up for everyone to see. Again, so this is for those reporting on the fiscal year going on to the calendar year. So one thing that I do want to know is for the 2024 permit cycle, yes, you will be required to report, to make a submission on net MS4 for that year, no matter how short or how long it may be. It will be required. Again, this is an automated system, so we don't want to get you flagged. We don't want to get you in trouble. We're still kind of in the works of trying to figure out if there's a 2 or 3 day reporting period, how do we address that? But right now, as of general advice, we advise for you to make a submission. For year 7, so this is kind of a great question that we've been getting a lot lately, is what if I have a year 7 that's 2 or 3 weeks long, or that's just not that long in general? After some internal conversations within ourselves, within our investigators, ultimately we've kind of we want to focus a little bit more on the transition to the 2024 permit cycle. So if your reporting period is not all that great, we do appreciate if you do submit an annual report, but if there hasn't been much progress done because of the timeline, then we understand. Essentially, what we're looking for is to make sure that everybody is on board on this new permit cycle. And that's our main priority at the moment. So the other one, it says the renewal is due in February 2025 with an annual report due at the end of December. Most MS4s will be working on that before submitting the NOI and new Stormwater Management Program. Are we supposed to try to get the NOI and the SWMP submitted in December in addition to the annual report? Again, the focus right now is to get everyone transitioned onto the new permit cycle for year 1. Year 6 is definitely a priority. Year 7, because of how short it might be, again, we understand if there's not much that can be done for year 7.
I want to clarify that we still need a report, just the extent of when the report is submitted and what covers is what you need to communicate with us individually so we can guide you as to what we expect from you, because as Jesse said, everybody's situation can be slightly different. So we want to make sure that you still are compliant with the requirements of submitting a report, but it's based on when you submit your NOI, when your NOI gets approved, And if there's a couple of weeks or so that are in a situation that could be not in limbo, but just causing more confusion, we can definitely help talk to you on how to proceed with your unique situation. So definitely we encourage you to call us, write to us, meet with us, and we can help you and guide you through your specific unique situation.
All right. Again, thank you, Rebecca. For one of the questions that we got in as well, I wanted to clarify that December 1st of 2024 was not a deadline for obtaining coverage under the general permit or under the new general permit. It's simply just a kind of a scenario I set up for this hypothetical situation in which an MS4 does get coverage. The deadline is not until February 11th of 2025. Okay, there's another question which we got. I'll go ahead and read out the whole thing. It says, if I currently report on the calendar year cycle, do I report year 6 as January 1st through the effective date of the new permit? What about the effective date of the new permit until the end of 2024? So if you're currently in the calendar year, I'll go back a slide just because it has a little less text. This will be January 1st of the current year, and that will extend until you obtain coverage. That can be on December 1st, or that can be after that. If you do, because you're still under the 2019 permit cycle and you're reporting on the calendar year, if you obtain coverage after January 1st or after December 31st, your year 6 will be from January 1st of 2024 until December 31st of 2024. So this green bar will extend all the way over here, and then ideally you'll get coverage shortly after that, and then you'll begin year 1 after January 1st of 2025. And I think that is the extent of the questions that we have. I don't know if we have more time. I think we might, but again, I just want to go back to this slide, our last slide with our contact information. We're always happy to discuss this, to explain this whatever way we can, to make sure that we're all on the same page. Feel free to contact us. Give us a call if that's easier for you, or if you're better talking with somebody. If you need visual aid, we can provide that. You can send us an email and we'll reach out back to everyone.
It does look like one more question came in. Is there a chart to see if we are discharging into an impaired water body?
So I would like to ask somebody from the team if they can provide the link to in response, but we do have a water quality, surface water quality viewer. Essentially, you can find, it's a GIS map where you can find where your MS4 is located and kind of trace where your discharge goes, and it'll give you more information on whether or not that water body is impaired, to which you'll then check on the impaired water bodies page.
And then one more question. Could you explain again what MEP is?
So MEP stands for the maximum extent practicable. Essentially, this is a term that we use within the MS4 permit to kind of describe what the effort is that we are expecting from MS4s. We're always expecting for MS4s to do the best that they can, according to their resources and their ability to implement the BMPs and to ensure that they're eliminating discharge of pollutants onto the surface waters of the state. This is different for MS4s, and this is just kind of the term that we've used to capture the case for everyone in Texas.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Renewal webinar. If you haven't yet, please complete our survey linked in the chat. Your survey and attendance responses help us produce better webinars in the future. If we did not answer your questions today, or you think of more, please email us at swgp@tceq.org. renewal.texas.gov. Thank you again and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. We appreciate it.